Hey guys, I'm Trazillion, voice of reason, and yesterday we started to tell the story, and it's the story of the religions in this fictitious land. And remember, this is for entertainment purposes only. This is just a story. So we knew that the Anak came down to Earth and created the division within mankind. And once upon a time, there was only one religion. And that was run by a man called Ibrahim or Abraham, and that's where we get the Hebrews from. And there was another group as well in another continent. We're going to call that continent Mu in this story. And these people, this religion, was called the Paganes. And the Paganes were a different form. They looked at the world in a different way. They saw that this bright shiny object in the sky, which we're going to call the moon in this story, and it had an effect on the waters in the planet in this story. But not only did it have an effect on the planet, it actually had an effect on their womenkind. And every 28 days, as this moon went around the planet, so life would be able to be formed by the women of the Paganes. So they worshipped this moon. They thought that this moon was a goddess because it was distinctly female and nothing to do with the men. And of course, the men didn't really like that at all, as you can imagine. So the men were very much more into the sun, because the sun shone, was allowing them to work, to create action, to create building and farming, and that is why the men preferred the sun, and the women preferred the deeper reflective elements of the moon. Now the Paganes were very much into nature. They saw what was real. They would use what grew naturally in the world for healing and for herbology. And this, again, was a secret wisdom. And this wisdom was called the wisdom of the wise, or Wicca. And in that way, this was another threat to men, because the women of the Wicca knew what was really going on in the world. They didn't need faith at all. They just needed truth, because what grew and what worked was truth. They didn't necessarily have to ask for a god that they couldn't see. They just went to nature, and they would call this goddess Gaia. And Gaia always gave them what they required, and this infuriated the men. So the Paganes were a distinct threat to the original gods, not so much the gods, but the gods' intermediaries. So when the gods in this story decided that they needed more power, but there were few of them, there was only 600 of them, so they decided to elevate some of the men in this race to speak to them directly, because they couldn't speak to everybody. So they created a thing called the priesthood. And the priesthood were an elite band of very, very loyal men. And these men were the word of the gods. Now this put them into conflict, of course, with the women of the Wicca, because the women didn't need to speak to gods. They just needed to speak to Gaia and to speak to the world of which they lived in. They didn't need to see or understand or have faith in some god in the sky. To them, the goddess was all around. And this infuriated the men, because the men always fear what they can't understand. And this sacred women's business of the Wicca and the moon and these moon goddesses and all of these rituals which centered around the seasons, which actually happened. You didn't need faith. You didn't need to have made up rituals. They saw it. They saw northeast, south and west, fire, earth, air and water, the elements. They saw the 4 seasons. And at that point, the people of the Wicca became less and less powerful and had to almost like move underground because the men decided that they were too much of a threat. Now, the easiest way for men to be able to supplant the women of the Wicca was to create another religion. Now, as we know, we had the jewels, which were the predominant religion of 12 tribes. But in one person who was a jewel became more enamored with the power of what was real. And these people were called the Christies because they were from what is called the Christ consciousness. It wasn't anything to do with a man or a god. It was about consciousness that pervaded the whole of the universe, not just one planet. So the Wicca were very limited in that they could only work within what was in the planet. Whereas the Christies started to believe that there was something much greater that pervaded the whole universe. Now, unfortunately, when men get hold of something good, they tend to corrupt it because they want the power. And that's where I'm going to leave it for today, because we're going to talk next about how the Christies became corrupted by men and how that planet in this story, which is just a story, became something different to what it was initially imagined. So this is Simon Trizelian. Enjoy your story time, and I'll be back with you very, very soon before you know it. And thank you for the support. We're knocking this out of the park. People are obviously very interested in these stories. So yeah, let's keep it this way so that we can actually get the story out in the most effective way possible, as opposed to fronting up against people that have the switch to switch you off. We don't want to do that. Okay, Simon Trizelian, out to you. Bye-bye now.